I know I'm about 20 years late, but I finally watched the movie Fight Club. This is going to be a spoiler video because, again, the movie's been out for like 20 something years now. This is just my reaction to watching it for the very first time. One thing that I think is kind of crazy is that I, in a way, predicted the twist without knowing I did. Going into it, I only really knew two things. That one, there's a part where they say,
the first rule of Fight Club is you do not talk about Fight Club.
and then the second thing is that there's this big twist, which surprisingly I was able to avoid all of these years. I think a big reason for that is because this movie came out before social media was really big, where people were talking about movies all over the place and posting memes and spoilers. I mean, of course, there are memes of this movie, I'm sure, out there, but not to the level that there would be for a movie today. So it was a lot easier for me to not see huge plot points all over the place. As the movie opens, you see Ed Norton in a chair tied up with a gun in his mouth, and in the narration, he talks about how he's there because of Tyler Durden. And at first, I'm like, who is Tyler Durden? Is he Tyler Durden? And little did I know I was dead on, because it turns out he was. Spoiler alert. Now, throughout the movie, I think there were some interesting tricks that David Fincher did that threw me off the scent for a little bit, but then there were some other moments that made me start thinking again, like, oh, wait a minute, what if it is him? And so I was kind of going back and forth. The first thing is when Brad Pitt is introduced, that kind of threw me off the scent for a little bit. I'm like, oh, okay, so there is another character named Tyler Durden. I wonder how this guy connects. But then as the story keeps going, I'm like, wait a minute, some things aren't adding up. For example, the big inciting incident of this movie is that Ed Norton's character's apartment gets burned down. And as they talk about the situation more, it seems very suspicious because Tyler Durden, Brad Pitt's version, keeps talking about how to make a bomb and how he knows all the ingredients and stuff. And then there's a moment when Ed Norton's character, Tyler Durden, is on the phone with the police, and in the background, Brad Pitt's character is like, oh, you're going to tell him that he burnt your place down? And I'm like, did he just say that he did it? Did I miss something? And I guess I didn't, because again, he is that Tyler Durden. Like, it's a split personality. I think that's what they're kind of getting at, is like he had some kind of disassociation or some kind of split personality. There is a book to this, which I haven't read, obviously, so maybe they explain it more there. On top of that, there's also a moment with Marla, played by Helen Bonham Carter, really well. They're talking about sleeping with each other, but he thinks that she's sleeping with Brad Pitt. And as they're talking about what he's doing with the Fight Club and stuff, he says we, and she's like, we? He also mentions that these two are never in the same room together, Brad Pitt and Helen Bonham Carter, unless they're sleeping with each other. So that's another clue that something's kind of off. There's also a moment where Brad Pitt talks about how he works at a movie theater and he works the projector and he's responsible for changing out the film. And he mentions that sometimes he sneaks in a little frame of porn or something into the reel, so people watching a kid's movie, a family movie, will see, like, for a split second, something really inappropriate, but they won't really know. Like, they'll know, but they're not really sure, so it kind of freaks them out. And throughout the movie, you see that happening because there are moments where I noticed it very early on that there's something that just kind of flashes on the screen. And it's not until you really get to that part that I'm like, oh, it's him. It's Tyler. It's Brad Pitt's version of the character flashing on screen. I also noticed earlier in the airport, you see them pass by each other. And so I guess that's like the first clue that Tyler Durden, Ed Norton's character, is kind of losing it. So at this point, I was still kind of on the fence. I realized that, of course, Tyler Durden, Brad Pitt's version had more to the story than they were letting on. Like, there's more to it. I also found it suspicious because I was watching it with captions on that they always refer to Ed Norton's character as narrator. They never said his name. So I'm like, okay, his name must be a very big plot point. That might have something to do with the twist. So as the Fight Club itself progresses, it's starting to become a little more suspicious. Like, for example, when Ed Norton's character beats up Jared Leto's character, like, almost to death, the rest of the people don't really do anything. They just kind of stand by and watch. I'm like, why would no one try and intervene? I mean, of course, the rule, one of the rules, I think, is that you can't stop the fight. Like, you have to just let it keep going. But still, something was very off of that, and they just let him walk away after that. So that was weird. The cherry on top for me in this whole twist is that you see Ed Norton's character flying around across the country trying to chase Tyler Durden and stop him from spreading the Fight Club and Project Mayhem around. But oddly enough, everywhere he goes, it's already there, and he feels like he's one step behind Tyler Durden. It starts to click that maybe the reason that these places are popping up with Fight Clubs and Project Mayhems is because Ed Norton's character is inadvertently bringing those with him. And then it clicks in the bar when the guy mentions, like, you're Tyler Durden, sir, is this a test? And then he confirms it with Marla that he is Tyler Durden. It all starts to, like, bleed together, because even in the car when Brad Pitt's character is trying to drive him into a truck and he says, that's why I burned your place down, because blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I knew you did it. Because at first I'm like, if that's the only twist, I'll be a little disappointed. But then again, there's a new level to it. So the whole situation happens because Tyler Durden has this kind of split personality thing where the Brad Pitt version of him is like this cooler, more chaotic version of himself that I guess he wishes he was. And then he is just this unassuming, like, doesn't really have much going for him version of himself. And I just think the execution of this twist overall was really well done. Now, I think there are some elements where you have to have a suspension of disbelief because, for example, there's a lot of moments where he starts fighting himself because he is fighting Brad Pitt, who is in his mind. There's one moment where they're in the parking garage and he's like dragging him and then throwing him down the stairs. Now, I can believe how he could throw himself down the stairs, but dragging himself, that was the part where I was like, I don't know if that kind of works. That started to become a little more supernatural. But then again, this movie overall is like, how scientifically accurate is it? But there's also a moment that I think kind of helps you believe that more, which is when he's beating himself up in front of his boss. I think that moment's there so you can kind of believe that he could do all this stuff to himself and have this kind of split personality thing. Overall, that twist I think was definitely worth the hype. That was pretty crazy. But besides that, there's so much else going on in this movie. You do have the relationship between Tyler Durden, the real Tyler Durden, and Marla, who I feel bad for in the end. Like, Marla, again, was not a great person overall. I mean, she was doing the same thing Tyler was doing, going to all these support groups just to leech off of them, not really because she needs them. But then again, she ultimately becomes a victim because she gets dragged into this man's craziness, and at one point she even gets kidnapped. And so it's like, she didn't ask for all of that. But at the same time, I still felt bad for her. Another thing that I found interesting about this movie is the progression of Fight Club turning into a terrorist group. I did not know about that part at all. And it really went 0 to 100 because at one point they're just doing this Fight Club, which even that in itself was a little over the top, right? But then it goes a step further because they start planning all these pranks, which then slowly turn into terrorist plots like blowing up buildings. Even one of them gets shot and they still want to keep going. They even use that guy's name as part of their chants. You're going to see how all these people are slowly becoming more unhinged under Tyler Durden's influence, and it's pretty crazy. It's also interesting that he has this out-of-body experience, which is another moment where I was suspicious, where he has a dream of having sex with Marla. It seems very vivid, but he just thinks it's like maybe like a sex dream or something. It's interesting because you see them have these conversations about having sex, but on Marla's end, she's very frustrated because like, we just had sex, what are you talking about? And Tyler Durden, Ed Norton's character, doesn't realize it was him. He has this sort of out-of-body thing, right? So he doesn't realize that he was doing it. So he keeps talking about it as if it was another person, which is weird to her. Again, she gets mixed up in all this, and she doesn't quite deserve it. All these things together, I think, just make a really crazy movie. Definitely worth the hype. I'm glad the big stuff was not actually spoiled for me, even though I kind of figured it out. I'm still really blown away by this movie. I love how it was made. I love how it was shot. The technical aspects, the VFX, all of it came together really well. And I think this twist does definitely hold up. I do want to rewatch it again to see if I can pick out more clues along the way. If you're like me and you still haven't seen this movie, it's on Hulu. Please check it out. I don't know how much longer it's going to be on there, but definitely try and watch it while you can, because for me, one of the main reasons I couldn't watch it is because I kept missing it on streaming. It usually pops up on Amazon Prime, but I keep missing the window where it's available for free. So if you have the opportunity to watch this movie and you haven't already, please do. If you've seen this movie probably way more times than I have, let me know what you think of it down in the comments. Did you figure out the twist before, or did you get completely blindsided by it? Let me know down in the comments. Also, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.